Okay, hello. We are live. How's it going, Joel?
I'm doing well. Happy Monday. Happy Inauguration Day, Mel.
Happy Inauguration Day, even to those who do not celebrate, because even if you do not celebrate, you still have to deal with it.
Yeah, that's true.
um, I'm literally watching. Donald Trump is taking the oath of office right as we speak in the Capitol building. And then Vice President elect JD Vance will take the oath of office. So they're in just to kind of like level set. I know we're going to have a conversation that's focused mostly on financial markets and the economy and how that relates to Canada and public policy. But one of the things I thought was super interesting. So they're inside the Capitol building this morning because it's apparently too cold. Usually, you see those iconic photos of them standing on the balcony outside of the Capitol building, but they're actually inside the Capitol Rotunda right now because it's too cold. And the last time that happened was in 1985 when Ronald Reagan was sworn in, which I think is kind of interesting because we're having, many people on the conservative side of things really harken back to the economic golden era of
Ronald
Reagan.
Reagan.
Not necessarily saying that was entirely true, but I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, there was a
And
lot of
then,
juxtaposition that was odd over the weekend where people were making some jokes about it being inside and where we were January 6th, 4 years ago.
yes.
All very funny. Sadly, but I do want to point out that it was this cold when Obama was inaugurated.
You know what? We like to elect older presidents now, and the temperature matters
Yeah,
when you're pushing 80. So that's
that's
with
a
Biden
very
as
good
well,
point.
right?
Very good points. But
um,
I'd like to
yeah,
get your lay of the land on where we are in Canada, what it looks like in the United States. Maybe go over some of the people that are being kind of appointed, and they were stressed all last week. My understanding is they were kind of going through the Senate. Is that who passes?
yeah. So we can actually even probably share a link after to our Pocket Lobbyist resource that we've been tracking all of the appointments. So you're totally right. So essentially, what happened after the November election is like that everybody who was elected to Congress and to Senate, and of course the president and vice president, that ticket, those people are sort of elected. So they're the president elect, vice president elect. And then the president has the ability to make several different appointments. There's, I think, thousands of them that they can make, but several of them, including certain secretary positions, so for the cabinet, as well as certain ambassador positions, and the heads of certain agencies have to go through Senate appointment processes or Senate confirmation, so that the president will appoint who they want to be in these roles, and then the Senate, as a way of sort of division of powers from the legislative branch, approves and allows, I guess, confirms these different appointments to go through. And as you say, that happens over the course of the few weeks before president is sworn in, and Inauguration Day, which is today, with the new Senate and Congress in place. They were all sworn in earlier this month. And so that's what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. But now we have Trump, he's officially the 47th president, just sworn in. So big impacts as far as it goes with respect to the economy and finance. So we can get into some of the specifics about that, but you asked about just sort of level setting within Canada as well. So we chatted before Christmas after the most recent cabinet shuffle. At that point, Justin Trudeau had not said that he was going to step down. And so we were in a period of flux or free fall or limbo, whatever you want to call it, based on where your perspective is. At that point, we didn't really know what was going to be in store for Canada. And to a certain extent, we still don't know what's going to be in store for Canada, because even though Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has stepped down, we are in the midst of a Liberal leadership race, which will come to a vote on March 9th before Parliament returns after prorogation on March 24th. So that is very high level. I'm sure we'll get into details. But that's sort of where we are at. We have in many ways, lame duck prime minister that is in place in Canada that is spearheading what is the most important economic relationship for Canada with a new president. This afternoon, we are expecting that President Trump at the Capitol building shortly will sign up to 100 executive orders, from immigration to energy to perhaps tariffs. We're hearing perhaps that won't happen on the tariff side of things right away, but sort of yet to be determined. And so from Canada's perspective, we have a prime minister who will be responding to and dealing with Trump until March 9th, over the next couple of months. During that, a period where a lot is going to happen in the markets and the economy in response to what's happening in the United States, without certainty of what's going to happen in Canada, from both the perspective of who's going to be elected Liberal leader and who's actually going to form a government in Canada when we go to the polls this year, depending on when that is. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop talking, but that's sort of like a high-level overview of where we're at with the Canada-US relation side of things.
So this morning, I had a number of phone calls with clients, friends, people that are interested in kind of what happened over the past weekend and the week prior. And as an Albertan group, we had at least on what I would deem to be political media, Twitter, etc. It was a very volatile week where we had the Alberta premier who went and to Mar-a-Lago
She's actually in Washington right now as well, I'll add.
Yeah. So my understanding is she's not in the building, but at the Canadian Embassy, which was also drama in itself. But the situation really kind of posed this differing of economic interests between our province, the rest of the country, and the United States. The next 3 to 6 months from a Canadian's perspective is going to be quite exciting, volatile. I'm always of the opinion that never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
And when it comes to these sorts of things, it's very important in grounding yourself and understanding that the large majority of the world is good, and they're attempting to make a better deal for everybody. Now, what does that actually look like? It really seems as though our premier locally here in Alberta is trying to jockey for a better deal for Albertans, more specifically our energy market. That has then caused a lot of problems across the rest of the country with regards to perhaps her throwing the rest of the provinces under the bus, so to speak, not coming together and negotiating as a team. And that has caused a lot of Canadian volatility. However, if you were to look at the actual market, no one's cared.
Yeah.
The United States and Canada are both up pretty near the same amount this year on year-on-year returns from an equity perspective. Energy, interestingly enough, is up double digits, depending on which company you're looking at. Yep. So this is all to say that in the face of a very bearish market sentiment, equities are holding up fine. If you really double click down on what a 25% tariff means for Canada, I believe it's a very mixed situation. However, if you were to look at it more broadly from an economic perspective, BMO specifically has come out and said, and most of the other banks have corroborated this forward-looking guide, that a 25% tariff is likely going to result in a 2 to 2.5% GDP reduction if it were to actually go in and be maintained.
Is our GDP even growing?
Right.
Sorry,
that would throw us into an official Canadian recession. So as a result of that, what the Bank of Canada would probably do first out the gate would be a rate cut. You'd see 100 basis points cut immediately, and it would likely continue. The banks are assuming that we're more likely going to fall on that 5 to 10% tariff rate across the board out the gate. And as a result of that, you're probably more so going to look at a 0.5 to 1% GDP contraction. That is not great. That is a recession. Any contraction in GDP for greater than 2 quarters is deemed a recession by economic definition. That doesn't necessarily mean bad, good, or otherwise for equities. the economy is not the stock market. However, that is what the current guide is on the street. Traditionally, if you were to take a look at the USMCA, it's usually to be expected that energy tariffs would be exempt, or they would not exist. Does that happen this time? Really, really hard to say. I mean, trying to predict Donald Trump and his, like, what he's going to do has always been difficult. So, and if you were to try to extrapolate worst case scenario, we really need to kind of look at what makes up the U.S. Canadian energy agreement. How are we intertwined? So in the United States, they import like 6.5 million barrels per day. This is 2023 data. If you were to ascribe Alberta's contribution or Canada's contribution to that, it would be roughly 60% of their energy imports.
Yes, and I think I'm going to get the exact number. I have it written down, but most of that is from Alberta, right? Like, that's
Correct.
the important part.
Like 3.9 million barrels plus 270,000 barrels per day of condensate. The economic impact of a tariff on that specific energy item would be fairly significant to gas prices in the United States. His promises coming into office are that energy prices aren't going to go up. What likely results of this, though, in the market, from the market perspective, is you end up getting WCS spreads, so WCS, WTI spreads that are going to expand. RBC seems to think that if we get a 25% tariff, you're going to see an $18 to $20 spread.
Which is very bad for Canada.
Yeah.
It's not good for Canada, especially in the context of how that's impacting our US-Canada dollar, right? Like, it's a huge
100%.
impact.
And having a weaker dollar actually benefits us to an extent. Just
on trade.
Mm-hmm.
But because oil is denominated in USD, we're like, that's the interesting difference, is like, yeah, if our dollar is relatively less than the US, then exports, it makes us more attractive. But because we are selling raw bitumen to the States, they are refining it, and then we are buying it back from them. Like, we are buying it back
in the East, more interestingly.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
We refine it at home here. We have lots of refineries. It fills up all of our gas stations. However, because we have yet to be able to produce and build heavy oil refineries in the East, and we also have not been able to build a pipeline east. We then send our heavy oil south to the United States. So something like 93% of our oil energy exports go south. It is then refined either in the mid and or south refineries. It is then piped back up northeast to Toronto, Quebec, the Maritimes.
Yeah.
Irving Oil is like the largest refinery in North America. It is out in the Maritimes. It imports all of its oil predominantly from the Middle East, because that's light sweet. That is how their refineries are built. So this all impacts the east side, and obviously impacts us. What we end up doing with this information and how we end up strengthening our hand is yet to be seen. But I think it's important to also include the reality that we have TMX finally coming online.
Yes.
That puts up something to the tune of 630,000 barrels per day in boat export. That is a big deal. It's not everything, but I mean, you can scribble some rough math. That is a very important pipeline to have been finished, given our current negotiation situation. So what does the market think of this from an Alberta perspective? Our individual oil names are holding up fine. I do think from an economic point of view, this is going to cast some doubt short term. However, as I mentioned earlier, don't waste a good crisis. This is likely going to result in a bilateral energy agreement that we've never had before. That is exciting, to be able to negotiate with a pro fossil fuel Senate, House, and executive branch in the United States, that is something we haven't had the opportunity to do in a very, 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 very long time. Obviously, they could have done this in 2016, but we now have more negotiating leverage with TMX being built. And that is really important to think about it. The near shoring and onshoring of production in the United States is a focus more so than it was in 2016.
Yes.
Getting reelected, the view of energy independence has vastly improved versus 2016, 2017, 2018. All of this is very bullish if you were to see it get cleaned up and us negotiate a strong deal. My question back to you is more along the lines of who is negotiating right now with Donald Trump's team. I'm guessing Lighthouser is going to get the go ahead again. I would hope that Freeland's going head to head with him one more time. What's the reality here? I have no clue who is getting this file, and I'm hopeful that you can help me answer that.
So I have a couple of things to say in response to what you've just said. So, okay, I have a question and then a comment. So the comment is, and maybe I'll save this sort of expansion from when we talk about the players involved. But one thing that I think, that is nice for Canada is the Secretary of Energy that Trump has appointed is the former founder and CEO of Liberty Energy. So this is somebody as well who has knowledge of and connection to the energy sector in North America in a way that I think will perhaps benefit Alberta. Just even having that level of understanding of how things work is super important. And again, like in terms of some of the people that Trump has himself appointed around some of these key roles, it's a different environment this time, because whereas people in 2016, Trump 1.0 didn't want to be anywhere near Trump, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the tech sector, et cetera, but people are not, it is now increasingly more socially acceptable to be in and around Trump's era. Not even just I don't even think you have to be, because remember, you couldn't even, in 2016, if you were to take a meeting with Trump, that was just seen as collaboration in a way that was sort of unacceptable. So I think that's a really important point, is this, we've seen him before, we sort of know him a bit, he knows what he's doing a little bit more, and we're also just in a little bit of a different time than we were in 2016. So I think that does bode well for Alberta's energy sector, narrowly speaking. Now, I think that it would be wise of us to not just consider the impacts of this on Alberta and on Canada generally, because I think that's something that we should be doing if we're going to sort of approach some of the tough tariffs that may come for later today or at some point. But you're asking just with respect to who's negotiating on behalf of Canada. So basically, there's a couple of ways that you can sort of look at this. So we have representatives, provinces have representatives in Washington, and Canada has an ambassador in Washington as well. So there's that sort of diplomatic channel as well. Now, obviously, there's a prime minister to sort of White House connectivity somewhat that happens. And so the people who are in Prime Minister Trudeau's office, even though he's on his way out and in March there'll be somebody different, those folks are still going to be having those conversations. Now, we can discuss the extent to which they're going to be successful in those conversations, because they don't have the sort of legitimacy that maybe the Trump administration would expect. And they're kind of just you're sort of medium interim partners. We don't know what we're going to do with you. So there's that side of things. But then Canada also does have a cabinet committee on Canada-US relations. I don't know to what extent the individuals that are involved in this cabinet committee, so this would be all liberal cabinet ministers that are there. Freeland is currently on it. However, I think it's worth noting that she announced her run for leadership yesterday, and typically it's customary for, if you are actively running for leadership, that you are not involved in cabinet. So I don't think that we should expect to see Freeland in and around those negotiations. Though I do take your point in that I
That's
think,
a
especially
bummer.
during the, yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure what will happen there, but I mean, she's still up on the website as being part of it, but, and she's the chair, but
Mhm.
typically that is something that steps back. Maybe she'll be allowed to stay because of the good of the country and her experience and all of that. I don't know what will happen there. So it is really, I would say, probably the majority of the work that is actually getting done right now is happening at those diplomatic levels. So, like the ambassador level, the
Okay.
sort of bureaucrat level, um, and especially as it comes to those tariffs, because even though Trudeau is not going to necessarily be the prime minister for in a couple of months, there's still a role for he and his cabinet to play in talking to the US about whether or not they go ahead on these tariffs.
Mhm.
Now, to sort of expand on another point that you had, we do have premiers, notably Premier Doug Ford and Premier Danielle Smith in Alberta, doing their own sort of sideline diplomacy when it comes to the Canada US relationship. And so uh, Smith was down at Mar-a-Lago last week. You know, Ford's being sort of out in the media trying to defend the auto sector, et cetera. It's kind of difficult to say whether or not Smith going down there and having a conversation moved the needle, or things that Ford said moved the needle. We just don't know. But what we do know is that some of the premiers in Canada and some of the political leaders in Canada, mostly on the conservative side, are definitely speaking the language of Trump more so than some of the more progressive leaders that we have in Canada. And so there is a built in, like, recognition and like trust of sort of being on the same team that I think just inherently happens as part of
Mhm.
those discussions. So uh, I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's sort of
Yeah.
time will tell, but I do think that lots of the work that we're going to see is going to happen at that bureaucrat level, which is why, you know, when you're like lobbying or like looking at anything that's happening, it's not just about the political leaders. They're very important, but there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes too.
Yeah, it feels to me, as I listen to you kind of lay it out, that this negotiation will be a can that's kicked down the road rather than it being enacted immediately from a tariff
That would be
perspective.
ideal for Canada. We don't know if that's going to happen yet, but yeah, that would
Yeah.
be ideal.
Um,
Biding time.
if they can pull that off, fantastic. The my I go back to what Trump was asking for, and it was
Sorry, I
he
just
want
want to interrupt you. I'm watching Trump's inauguration speech, and he just said, "Trump, we will drill, baby, drill." So that gives you a sense of where he's going to be on the oil side of things.
yeah,
Sorry, I just had to point that out. Drill, baby, drill. We
of
gotta.
course. That's if you go back to 2016, everybody in Alberta remembers um, what we went through when there was a baby drill mandate. Um, more oil coming online is not necessarily bullish for um, energy prices more broadly. However, let's not get into that too much. I wanted
Yeah.
to kind of point out that Trump is very good at signaling what he wants. He said that he wanted a stronger northern border and he wanted a smaller trade deficit.
Hmm.
Obviously, the current account trade deficit issue that the United States has is unique to them having the control of their own dollar, which is the economic denomination of the entire planet. The large majority of countries that have import focused service based slash self-reliant economies like they do tend to have these deficits. It is a very it's a strategically a great place to be, given that they're able to leverage it to negotiate good trade deals. We unfortunately have tied ourselves to that wagon. We are a massive mineral based economy. Obviously, it's not the only thing that we do. However, we export raw materials and then import finished goods. That's kind of what we do. It's what the large majority of countries do. So if that is our stated issue, it is clear that we now have a place to start the negotiation. Um, the the last time he was in office, the USMCA got ratified. I'm guessing there's going to be a change to that or an update.
Well, it's due for renegotiation in 2026, so those conversations are already started.
Beginning, right? So now my inclination is that that's when this gets resolved.
Yeah.
He is a boastful person who likes to get everybody up into a tizzy. It ends up resulting in getting things. I think it gives the notion that people need to get their butts in gear, and it results in deals getting done faster. I think that's the strategy. So as a Canadian who's terrified of what's going to come, and they're wondering what this does to their small business. If you're this affects people that are like bread makers. It affects pretty much everybody that are importing goods from the United States and or selling goods into the United States. So I understand the concern. However, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're often trying to build and create a situation where everyone benefits. I don't think, and the media will make you believe this to be true because it's better for ratings, but I don't believe that Donald Trump his main goal is to hurt everyone other than America. I think he recognizes the benefit of the relationship.
So I think I want to sort of riff on that, because I think that I definitely don't think that Trump is doing this because he wants to hurt our relationship, though we should be always aware that even though the US trade relationship means a lot to us, it doesn't mean as much to them.
Mm-hmm.
Their principal concern and I think benefit of Canada is really more so from like a security point, right?
Yeah.
And I would argue if we could get our act together on energy development when it comes to critical minerals and nuclear, even so that's a security element, but just in terms of like a supply chain aspect as well. So physical security as well as supply chain consistency on goods that we don't necessarily want to be procuring from China, for example, or dependent on China to procure. So I don't think that Trump necessarily wants to hurt Canada, but I think he wants, and we talked about this last time, I think he wants what he wants, and I think he knows exactly what he has to do and say to negotiate and get what he wants when it comes to that. So I don't think his intention is to hurt Canada's economy, but I think that he does know that if he threatens that or even walks further down that line in the way that he has, that Canadians are going to demand of their political leaders that they do something about it. And I think that because there is going to be such a difference and so much daylight between US policy and Canadian policy on several different things, one of which is immigration, another of which is defense, another of which is regulatory, and even just sort of ideological things like the sort of DEI and some of the more social issues, which we're not going to get into here today. But I think that the more daylight that there is between Canada and the United States, and the more that daylight prevents Trump from getting what he wants, the more pressure he'll put on. And so I think that the most important way to use leverage in this situation is understand where you have it and where you don't. And so not that I am advising any of the people who are having these discussions, but my advice would really be to like, you have to talk tough politically because it's an election year in Canada and you have to look like you're standing up to Trump. But I would be very careful about the rhetoric that comes out of my mouth if I were a political leader, because we need them. They don't need us in the same way. And so I think that that's a really important thing to just keep in mind. I think that part of the theme of his inauguration speech that he's delivering right now is really like they use the term of a revolution of common sense. So I think as much as what we're talking about has to do with the specific policy decisions and the economic actions, I think this might be a good place for us to sort of segue into talking about how that difference and how that culture shift is sort of getting into corporate America and social media, and how that is sort of interacting with the markets as well. Because one of the things that that I find fascinating is I've always sort of asked this in 2016, in 2020, and now this year. It's, did Trump cause this shift, or is Trump responding to a shift? Right. And so when I look at some of what's coming out of this inauguration and some of what has been sort of leaked in terms of what we can expect in executive orders, I'm seeing not just a economic shift in terms of America first, but I'm seeing a social and ideological shift back to what many would have understood, and this is why I sort of invoked Reagan in the beginning, as like the nuts and bolts of the economy. Like, I don't see Trump as wanting to be so prescriptive on some of these aspects of society that we've seen in the past. And then I'm going to turn this over to you, but that's really visible. Like, when he was being sworn in, it wasn't a bunch of, traditional companies behind him, like sitting behind him, and sort of like right near the center are like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and all of these tech giants that have become sort of part of the Trump fray. Curious as to your thoughts of, like, I know that the relationship between business and politics and policy is always it's always a dance. You're always responding to whomever's in the White House or in the Prime Minister's office in Canada, and trying to find that happy medium of returning value to shareholders in the most sort of like Friedmanist sense, but also sort of like doing so in a way that is acceptable within the current regulatory environment. So that was a long rant, but I'm curious in terms of your perspective. Like, we see all these people that have sort of not traditionally been on inside the circle. How do you think shareholders and the market is going to react to this social and ideological shift? I know it all comes back down to economics and like the dollars and cents, but like, what is that translating to right now?
It is. So when he had won his mandate, where they had swept the Senate, the House, and then the executive branch, he won all three levels of government. That ended up delivering a message that the story that the Republican Party was pushing was the one that the United States electorate had decided was the way to go. In politics and in markets, we have an ever-swinging pendulum where it's quite clear that from 2010 to 2022-ish, 2021, I believe we saw a very fast, was it fast? I don't even think so. We saw a swing to the more progressive left side from a social and economic perspective. Globalism thrived. You saw a pretty crazy increase, whether it be pro-immigration, pro-DEI measures, from a corporate governance perspective. These things were adopted. Over the last 3 years, 4 years, perhaps even a little longer, you could go back to Trump midterm. I'm of the opinion that he didn't set this in motion. I believe it was signaled from the core demographic of that party that they had perhaps gone far enough one way and have now decided that going the other direction is the way to go. And these company CEOs and entrepreneurs are often reading the tea leaves, and they can see where the market's headed, where the puck is going, the proverbial go to where the puck is going, not to where it is today. And this is quite clear if you were to watch any one of the more popular podcasts. If you were kind of had your finger on the pulse, you could see this shift very, very obviously mid-Biden term. And you could kind of forecast it.
Also happened to be mid-COVID too. Like those
Yes.
timelines overlapped as well. It's interesting to point out.
And I think what it did is it shoved it faster. Like any crisis, it ends up moving things and adding some pace to the momentum. But could we have had a two-term Democrat if you didn't end up having COVID and the inflationary pressure? Really difficult to say. However, Biden lost his mandate in the middle of an all-time high and in the stock market and the S&P and the Dow, and during record low unemployment. That is shocking.
So this is like, I think we need to focus on this point because it's more than just the economy, stupid, right? Mm-hmm. Like it is the economy, but it is like our perceptions about the economy as well. And you and I have talked about this a bit before. And actually Scott Galloway talks a lot about this too. Record high stock market levels and record low unemployment. Like the way we calculate unemployment doesn't calculate the people who have given up looking for work or who aren't actively looking for work. And the stock market does tend to benefit people who like
have made it.
Exactly. So that is a really, I think, interesting point that I think you should elaborate on, because I think it's not that I'm definitely not an anti-capitalist. Like I am a pro-capitalist, but it is interesting because the way that we have like the way that wealth is distributed now is just so different than in a purely sort of like capitalist economic model, right? So maybe just talk a little bit about that. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, the way in which I think the economic reality of markets and jobs and opportunity trickles down into the the overall culture is always interesting. If you kind of look at what was in the 1980s and 90s an economic boom of sorts, where there was a lot of optimism in the young, let's call it and that generation was Gen X, but the way that they viewed their opportunity in life and what they wanted to be as adults and how they wanted to contribute to the economy versus today is a very stark difference in how you perceive production and the actual value of a role in society. It seems to me as though we've lost a kind of a way of operating in the way in which we ascribe opportunity. The current generation that's graduating high school right now doesn't view opportunity in the country and doesn't identify with their country and the opportunity the same way that we used to. And I believe a push back towards that is where we're currently headed. And that has a massive impact. So this is going to take a while for me to kind of like work through. But my view is that the re-onshoring, the importance put back on engineering, on building real things, the having pride in where you're from and who you are. I see this as a current cultural shift that we're going through. If you just look at and perhaps this is just my bias, but if you're participating on social media, that is the difference between 2018 to 2022 and 2022 to present day. I view a shift back towards more conservative values, and that has resulted in a new president with a full mandate like that Trump has. Now, what does that mean, and how are companies reacting to that? Well, you get Mark Zuckerberg on the Joe Rogan podcast. You get Donald Trump getting $1 million campaign or checks written by Sam Altman, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Sundar Pichai. Every major tech corp is writing checks to Donald Trump to re-engage with the right side, with the conservative mandate that they left behind 6 years ago. And that shift, that direction, I think percolates from the ground back up. And Donald Trump is winning as a reaction to that. He would not have won if this wasn't interested, if this wasn't what the world wanted. If they wanted something else, you would have got a different president. You would have gotten a different political party in power. He would have lost the Republican mandate when he went to rerun to be the Republican nominee. He had to earn all of those positions again. And whether or not you believe he should or shouldn't is not actually the point. He was voted for, and he has now won. So this is all me kind of coming back to this this question of yours, which is like, what does this mean for the next 5 to 10 years? I think that's what you're, I think, signaling, and the shift from left to right. And I believe that you've now seen a commitment from large tech to supporting this new culture. I mean, shoot, if you were to listen to Mark Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan, that is a very different Mark Zuckerberg than the one that toured America in 2018, 2019.
Yes.
So, I mean, look at his hair. It's just, he's not the same person. And you're getting that popping up in the IPOs of companies that are seeing themselves listed in the stock market. The businesses that are doing well are different. The stuff that's still the same, I think, is just undergirding very large momentum in things like the degenerate economy. I did not invent that quote. This is a Howard Linsden thing. But what does that mean? We have a society that has become very dependent on social media versus legacy media. And we've also created new technology around betting markets, tokenization of assets and ideas, and your personality and you as a person. All of this has been a result of new technology, of blockchain, and that has created this, what was the topic du jour of the weekend. So this is all kind of this momentum shift, right? And some of the gross bubble-like effects of it have been this underlying cryptomania and the Solana meme coin craze. That is the world devoid of not having an economic identity, and then as a result of that meaning being unrecognized, have started to gamble a lot.
Yeah.
And this is just my view on things. This has become incredibly addicting. It's important. The legalization of sports gambling. We've always been people that we love speculating. Human beings do. And now we have these massive markets, whether it be betting on politics, betting on these meme movements. And I think what it does is it really just shows us where culturally we are today, and things that used to matter in the past perhaps don't at the moment.
And go ahead, sorry, and then I want to respond to that.
And we're refiguring out what the Gen A and Gen, I guess my kids are now considered to be Gen B of tomorrow. What's going to matter to them? Because the millennial generation is taking over for the boomer generation. We're having children. You have it feels like a lost generation that is searching for meaning, and there's a lot of speculation, a cultural shift back to the right, and you can see that the companies and their prospective leaders are really running with it because they see the momentum. That's what I'm currently seeing.
Yes.
That's what it feels like to me.
So I think this is such an interesting point. I wrote down a few things that sort of came to mind when you were talking about this. I think when we're talking about the economy and our sort of relative experience of whether it's better or worse, or, why perhaps we see a second Trump term, that's for many reasons, for many people, based a lot on economic factors, but also on social factors as well. It just made me think of, I read a book recently that a friend of mine recommended. I think it's a couple of years old, but it's called, oh my gosh, why can I not remember? But it talks about the concept of luxury beliefs, and this idea of like how our society, there's always people who have sort of more economic power than others. And in modern times, it's increasingly more difficult for people who do have more, relatively speaking, to differentiate themselves with like tangible things. So like a home or a car, or, different status symbols. And there has been, in the author's theory, at least, is that there's been a push to be able to continue to do so and differentiate oneself by way of those beliefs, right? And so you do see this sort of like shift among sort of like the upper class, so to speak, or people who have means that had sort of shifted their perspective on sort of more intangible things, like the idea side of things, right? So he talks a lot about in this book. There's a lot of sort of like juxtapositions between what people who have these luxury beliefs think and what they do, or like what they say and what they do. Like one of the examples was that thinking military service is amazing, but like not for my kids to go serve, kind of thing. Like just different ideas like this. What kinds of shows you watch, what kinds of media you consume. And I think that like because in politics and government institutions are so powerful in so many ways and used to be populated in many respects by people who occupied this like upper class, and now those barriers have really disappeared. Like I don't agree with her politics, but I love Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez's story of being elected. Like I love that there's, you can go from being a server to serving in Congress and do a good job if that's what people who are voting for you want. Like, again, I'm not endorsing her politics necessarily, but in today's day and age, there's less of those barriers. And I think that in these institutions, like kind of losing alignment with what we may have previously considered the upper class, and I'm saying this, I don't have a better term for it. People are looking for, people are seeing that and rejecting those institutions because these institutions that are supposed to serve everybody are just continuing in I would argue, in some people's views, to serve elites, but just in a different way. And it comes back full circle to the point that you talked about in terms of like making things in our economy. And even I mentioned it, like the sort of nuts and bolts. Like the crypto thing does not necessarily align with this, but I see broadly speaking this move by Trump and others to kind of go back to basics of like, let's build things. Let's, create valuable products. Let's, give people the opportunity to like go after that American dream or whatever you want to call it, the Canadian dream. And I see that that push as being something that people, I think, feel like they can like see and identify with. And like, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I just see this like shift to the tangible as being what it is. And I don't actually even know if it's like a conservative or Republican idea, because I think you could probably find examples across the aisle in both Canada and the US where one side has done this better than others. But that is what I see happening on the Trump side of things largely. And not that you have to agree with every policy, but I do see that as like the underlying theme. Like, we're not just going to do something because like somebody at Harvard or Princeton or Cornell told us that this was like what we do now. I don't know if that resonates. No, and sorry, to bring it full circle on the social media, people like you and I can just get on here and talk about our ideas and connect with people who like to hear what we're saying, podcast culture, all of this. So it's a decentralization of the power of the captive audience and legitimacy. Sorry, that was a long-winded rant, but that's what I see.
You have a deterioration of old institutions, trust in those institutions, a reality of the world shifting from what once was of the Reagan era of legacy media to something anew. I think the book you're referring to is a memoir of foster care, family, and social class.
Yes. Ben Henderson, I think is his name or something.
Bob Henderson, I think. He was in New York Times, etc. The ideology of luxury beliefs is like service for thee, but not for me, and I think a shifting in the underlying culture, which is that the Democratic Party, which was once the party of the, I think, the social class, the middle class, the lower middle class of America, has now become the wealthy. And as a result, they've believed that they are and continue to think that they are the party of the social lower middle class, but in reality have become the economic winners of today. And with their policy that they were kind of conveying on the world, they were effectively ignoring the real lower middle class and what they were calling for, and believing and creating or crafting policy and economic outcomes that benefited them today, but kind of threw on this this entitlement and belief that they were somehow better than those that are now currently, and I think that this is probably true, the Republican Party better represents the population that would be considered lower middle class. And what's interesting in politics today is that the people of the left and the right will call out the you're voting a billionaire into office who is supposed to represent the lower middle class. Like, that's silly. How is that possible? That is clearly just not rational ideology. However, what he spoke to was the reason for his mandate. And I think there is a sobering effect of all of that. And the reality that the left and progressive left has, to an extent, lost the plot, or I think is how the Republicans would refer to it, but more so just lost the interest of and the majority representation that they once held, I think, over the last 20 years. And they're going to need to see a shift as that pendulum goes back right. How do they find their new renewed policy outline for what the world and the Americans want? I think in Canada, we're experiencing the exact same thing. It is so clear to me. I mean, shoot, I'd love to kind of finish on this. Because I don't want to get into the crypto market too much. It was silly.
Yeah.
I have right now, the incoming the incoming SEC chair, it is believed that Trump is going to be more pro crypto. I think that what's likely is that they're hopeful that there'll be more regulation there. We'll see. It's really difficult to pontificate about what's going to happen there. But if you look at Canada and you have the two Liberal leaders that are running, you have Carney, which was his speech in Laurier in Edmonton was a very clear shift back to the center, or right, I would say. The likelihood that is the signal that his advisors are giving him, this is where you need to go. You bet if you intend on winning Liberal leadership moving forward, and even winning any form of election versus Pierre. I'm not sure, and I haven't familiarized myself with what Freeland's going for, but you can see a shift back the other direction. Where do you see this landing?
Yes. So I do think that is going to be what we see from all political leaders. Like, the fact that we have both Freeland and Carney talking about the fact that the presence of a consumer carbon tax is maybe not correct for our time. Like, we're talking about people who in not 2 years ago would have argued that having that perspective would make you a climate change denier and not smart on economic policy, right? So I do see people, and to Pierre Poilievre's credit, this is a sentiment that was very much spearheaded by him. Like, when we were going through the CPC leadership race in 2022, like, Pierre Poilievre was looked at very differently than he is looked at today. And I think that in Canada, he has definitely responded to a shift that's happening in public opinion when it comes to that. And so I think that we are going to see people increasingly, especially political leaders in Canada, increasingly focus on what is real. And so focusing on focusing on the sort of tangible. I can't feed my family. Everything is more expensive now. And I think that if they're going to be successful in that endeavor, they have to do so in a way that it is not just performative. And I think that requires a little bit of that requires one to genuinely care about the people who believe those policies. I always I can link it after, but I always go back to The West Wing, which I'm making Brock watch right now, by the way. But I mean, we'll see how long that lasts. Yeah. But in like season 2 or 3, Josiah Bartlett hires Ainsley Hayes, who's a Republican, to work in his White House, and they're having like a discussion about gun control. And I mean, if you've seen The West Wing, you know why that's relevant. And Ainsley Hayes says it's not that people are frustrated because you don't like the policy. It's because people are frustrated you don't like the people who like the policy. And I think that is really what kind of encapsulates some of the struggles the Democrats have had and some of the struggles that perhaps people have in Canada. And like you can feel it in like the disdain for people who think differently than this sort of way you're supposed to think. And I'm not even saying that I like agree with everything that is being discussed on the right or whatnot, but can we at least have a conversation, you know? And I think that people are losing faith in some of the people who are coming out on the left. I think Carney would actually, of all of the people who have come forward, probably be quite a formidable leader. I just don't know if he has that political sense in him to be able to really recognize the struggles that other people are having in like a meaningful way. Like he was born in the Northwest Territories. He grew up in Alberta, but then he was off to Harvard and doing amazing things and working on Wall Street. And like, good for him. He's smart. I think he did a great job as the governor of the Bank of Canada. I do not have a hate on for Carney like some people do. I just think that like to genuinely meet the moment, you have to actually understand and care about the things that people care about. And I was trying to pull this PDF that here, let me just, this is the whole crux. I'm going to add this to the stage. Just give me 1 second here. This is what I'm talking about. So I use this in our GR 101 cohort to talk about like how politicians should like analyze issues that they should care about. This is literally Maslow's hierarchy, and I use it a lot in politics because people are confused as to why, like, for example, like let's just pick on DEI. People are concerned about like why people are upset about DEI, but it's because if you are looking at the like love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization part of politics before you secure the bottom part, you cannot get people on board with you. And so while sometimes people like for conservatives with Trump and maybe in Canada are critical of the fact that like some of these leaders are like one-dimensional, like axe the tax, you know, like all these very, very simplistic things. And sort of, I don't think these people are trying to trick the electorate into thinking the problems are that simple. I think they're trying to mirror to the electorate. We understand that like the planet is important and climate change is important, but we understand that like you can't pay for that and also pay for groceries. And so that's a long-winded way of like, I think in Canada, we're going to come back to this era of like, what is real? What is tangible? I think that we're going to exit out of this era of like highfalutin academia, esoteric ideas. Like, I don't think we should not study those ideas. I don't think that those ideas don't matter. I just don't think that their place is at the center of social, economic, and financial policy of any government when there are other concerns that people are more stressed out by. Sorry, that was long-winded. Did that answer your question?
I love the Maslow hierarchy of needs pyramid. It is ultimately probably the basis of the political pendulum. If you move left, you go up. If you move right, you go back down.
Which you, just to interrupt you, which is okay to do. I'm not saying don't pay attention to the
all
top.
The things are still needs and important.
I'm just saying pay attention to the bottom before you pay attention to the top. Yeah.
We had a period through the pandemic where we stopped caring about the bottom and we sacrificed it to solve the top. And whether you think that's bad, good, or otherwise, it's just a reality. We've now gone into, especially in Canada, a situation where the cost of housing is so beyond affordability in our major city centers, especially in BC and in Ontario, that you've now lost the bottom rung. And we're still focusing politically on the top. And that is a very important signal as to why they've lost the plot. So now you can apply this everywhere, like quite literally everywhere, and it will give you a signal as to loss and why we're seeing the political shift, why we're seeing the economic shift, why you're seeing the focus of our major Fortune 500 companies change. And they're just trying to provide value and build. And I love that you brought that up because I think it really ties a bow on the conversation that we've had. And maybe it's just a reality of my age, I'm an optimist, and I believe human beings are constantly trying to create and make their lives better and those around them better. And as a result of that, it really proliferates and grows into the culture. And perhaps we are currently divided politically, and we have been for 10 years, 14 years. I believe it's actually healing a little bit, interestingly enough. And we're moving back in a direction, and not necessarily in terms of political ideology that's important, but a recrafting and creation of our institutions, rebuilding our trust in them, the shift of media and who is those that run it is now changing from what was once considered legacy to a new landscape of social, and how we end up dealing with it from a mental perspective and economic perspective, the incentives that it derives. I think it's quite obvious what's important in politics from a media perspective, but also for how we convey our messages to the population, how to best go about running campaigns. All of this stuff is shifting, and we're rebuilding trust in our new institutions. We still have those of old, but they're now being broken a bit to then be rebuilt. They're
going through a level set, like a reset almost.
Yeah. And that is a investable opportunity. Canada has been in a very challenging environment for a number of years. And we have a lot of things that are in our way. And if we can clear the way for our entrepreneur, for our economy, and build a better, stronger relationship with our partner to the south, who I know you've said that they don't need us. Good luck building a meaningful number of houses in America without Canada. Good luck filling your refineries without us, and good luck securing your border. All of these things are true, and they share the largest mileage of border with us. And it is in their best interest, our best interest, for us all to get along. And I think we're going to. It's just, you got to rebuild it back up. And that is going to likely be the kind of the overall.
Are you saying build back better, Joel?
No,
Goodness.
I'm not. You would never hear that from me.
Not as such. To
many words.
Ainsley.
But I think the story of this year is never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
Because it ends up resulting in great things. Think of all the innovation that came out of World War II. Think of all the incredible accomplishments we had through COVID. For all of these things that were negative, there's been equal, and I would argue we've created a situation where we're less fragile than we were 5 years ago.
Yeah,
and that is a powerful story. So it all depends on how you spin it.
I can go first, or you can go first. But like 3 things you're gonna watch in markets, not necessarily like you don't have to like give advice, but just 3 things that you're like watching in markets over the next little bit. And then I can say 3 things that I'll be watching too that I think will impact markets from like a public policy side of things. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. First thing I think I'm going to watch in terms of public policy and how this will impact markets is I'm going to look to see how Canada responds on the energy file, but not just narrowly with respect to tariffs, but like on critical minerals, on nuclear. Excellent article this morning in the Hub by Heather Exner-Perot about 5 things Canada can do to secure its energy future. So I'm looking at what Canada does in the next 3, 6, 12 months to open up other energy powerhouse channels that can strengthen that relationship with the United States. I am looking at what Trump's relationship and approach with China will be and how that will impact Canada in terms of like what does he do on TikTok? Like what does he do? What does he do about some of the sort of entanglements that China has in other areas like the Middle East, et cetera? So I'm looking at that foreign policy because I think there's a huge economic story there, especially for the United States, and to consider. So that's number 2. And I am going to look at, I think, I mean, they're walking out of the Capitol right now, and I'm sure we'll see some info on executive orders. I am going to look at what's happening on immigration. We didn't really get into this, but if Trump does go down the road that he has suggested he will, what are the inflationary impacts of mass deportation? Not social impacts. Like I don't want to say that I'm not acknowledging those impacts, but we're talking about economics right now. What is the impact, the inflationary impact of that? And
look back, back on Obama's term, he deported more people than anybody in history.
Yeah. And I'm looking at like if we're supposed to be lockstep with the United States on some of these things, like how do we respond to that? We're in a different situation. So yeah, I think those would be 2 things, like energy policy, China, and immigration. And I think all of those things will have an impact on markets and the US-Canada trade relationship.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I found a divergence from common political rhetoric that has been released recently has been Donald Trump's first trip. He's going to China. And
did you read that? Is he doing that?
Within the first 100 days, he's going to China.
Okay.
So that is a shift from, and this is his intention. Whether he does or doesn't, they haven't actually commented, but that is his desire and wish. I think that is incredibly important. I'm also watching the Chinese-U.S. relations. Interestingly, last year, the Chinese large caps actually outperformed the S&P 500.
What does that mean for us laymen?
Large caps being companies worth $150+ billion. I think the actual definition is 30, but anyways.
So like the biggest companies in China are outperforming the biggest.
China actually outperformed the S&P 500 in 2024. Interestingly enough, I think that's the market pricing in a step shift in policy and a step shift in the relationship there. It's quite clear that China is doing very poorly. If you look at their 10-year yield, absolutely getting eviscerated. So that Chinese-U.S. relations is very important from a overall economic.
Like all of the U.S.'s debt, basically.
Yeah, well,
the U.S. is in a lot of debt, and Trump got the U.S. into a lot of debt as well. Sorry,
sure. I mean,
we're supposed to be wrapping the bow, but there's so many things. Every time we bring something 100%. Up, I'm like, oh my gosh, but that.
They need it in order to be solvent, though. So they need a currency in which they can lend and borrow off of. So they buy it because it's the best thing to own. Now, I also am going to be incredibly interested in the capex of the large language model. And our cloud providers. This is the largest and most important piece to the U.S. economy, period, end of story. If we start to see a slowdown in the large language model improvements of 01, 03, which is the ChatGPT models more recently, if we start to see a step shift in the CapEx spend of the big 7, that would then indicate to me that we're going to see a U.S. slowdown. That coupled with the U.S. dollar, it's bumping up on the USDX is bumping up on 108. I want to see that reversal. So those 2 specific things, and then more. I mean, closer to home specifically, I'm definitely going to be paying a lot of attention to our dollar and the U.S. I actually view this as being a low point. None of this is financial advice, by the way.
Absolutely none.
Yeah, absolutely none. I'm going to be watching the dollar because I think that signals the trajectory of Canada, and the optimism viewed, and the opportunity view of the rest of the market. So,
well, I have a present for you. Poilievre has committed to reversing the changes in the capital gains inclusion rate that have not actually passed through Parliament, but will be on your tax bill this year.
Yeah, and Mark Carney also, in his address at Laurier, he spoke directly to the government will no longer be the deployer of capital. They will not be investing in money they do not have.
Good.
He kept on hitting on all the right things.
That's a good policy. Like literally, good policy is good policy. Like I tend to lean one way, but like I will happily call out good policy when I think it is good policy, especially for the economy.
Your two major parties in our country are moving one direction from an economic perspective. Bullish, period, end of story. Opportunity and the price of securities they base themselves off what's going to happen, not what has already happened. That's already priced in. We care about the future and where we're going. And to me, the road looks a little bit beat up, but shoot, we're filling in the potholes. So Chinese-U.S. relations, AI, AGI, and the improvements of large language models, and then the investment in those large language models is kind of number two, and then our Canadian US dollar and that trade agreement. Those are three things that I'm going to be focusing on.
That's so awesome. I feel like I've learned so much from this conversation, as I always do. We are planning to do this again in April after the first 100 days, I think. So we hope that if you liked this informal chat that you join us. Do you want to like plug yourself on Reform Millennials and where people can find you?
Check out my podcast, Reform Millennials. If you want to hear more about me, just follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. And
are you on Truth Social?
I would not ever. And I for the most part, I post on LinkedIn from an economic what I'm seeing in the world.
Amazing. Well, we'll keep in touch on all of these things. We see Biden departing the U.S. Capitol on Marine One now, and so we are officially in a new era, as Taylor Swift would say. Oh, dear.
I'm sure this is not
who even Taylor Swift could not shift the election results with her endorsement of the Democrats. So times are changing.
Let's not get into that. Well, Mel, it was lovely catching up.
Yes. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Happy working in this environment, and we'll chat soon. Thanks everybody for joining. We really appreciate you being here.